Hi everyone. Today I would like to talk about majoring in international relations. First, I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about my own journey. I started studying international relations as a freshman at the University of Florida, where I decided to triple major in history, economics, and political science. The reason I did this is because I wanted to challenge myself. Economics was something that I knew very little about before going to college, while history was one of my favorite subjects since I was a kid. Every summer, I applied for internships or prestigious study abroad opportunities. And most importantly, I learned from my failures. I applied to a lot of competitive scholarships such as the Rhodes, and I didn't get most of them. After I finish this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the prestigious Gates Cambridge Scholarship. And I believe, had I not done this early, sort of applying for prestigious scholarships, learning from my mistakes, I would not have been able to get the Gates Cambridge Scholarship and secure other academic and professional successes later on in my career. After finishing at the University of Florida, I spent a year working, and then I went to get a master's in international relations at the University of Chicago. The reason I picked the University of Chicago MA is because I knew it would challenge me academically. The program has very rigorous requirements. You're free to take classes in any department, so not just in political science, but I could also take them in the business school, in the law school, and thus gives you wide exposure to one of the best universities in the world. The other really important thing that I did is I developed relationships with faculty in my field. This is really important for letters of recommendation for PhD programs. It's also very important in terms of looking for a job after you graduate, and also getting a stronger understanding of the material that you study. In addition, because I was studying Chinese as a foreign language, I extended my one-year master's for an extra year to do a fellowship at the National Taiwan University to continue working at my Chinese. Lastly, I took advantage of the University of Chicago's alumni network to apply for my risk analyst job at US Bancorp, which I did after graduating. And this is actually quite common. Most of the universities have fantastic alumni networks, and this is a great place to meet recent graduates to learn more about a particular sector or job. It's also a great way to meet managers and people in a hiring capacity and sort of make that introduction, learn about potential availability, and sort of apply and stand out and get your foot in the door at a company or a particular sector. So after giving you a little bit of an overview about my own background, I wanted to talk to you guys about how to write an award-winning personal statement, how to pick a major, and then also how to pick the right IR school if you do want to study international relations. The first thing I would do is I would ask yourself the question of why do you want to study international relations, and what do you want to do afterwards? Now I know that's a very broad question, but most universities, they're going to want to hear, especially for a master's program, what are your plans afterwards? Now that can be something as general as I actually want to do a PhD afterwards, or I want to work in business in the private sector, or I want to work at an NGO, I want to do volunteer work, aid, research. It doesn't have to be incredibly specific, but you do need to have a broad idea. The second thing to do, once you've sort of thought about what do you want to study within that sort of field of international relations, is you need to look at prospective universities and programs. If you're applying for a PhD, you also will need a potential dissertation topic. Now, I know most of you are looking to do a MA program, so that doesn't necessarily apply to you. But even for the MA personal statement, it's a good idea to, in a sentence or two, mention a potential topic. For instance, right now, if you're applying and you want to do something with international economics, perhaps the One Belt, One Road program is something that you're interested in. Perhaps you want to do something, regarding, international investment in emerging markets, whatever or security questions, whatever it is, something broad is helpful. Lastly, this is really important. You need to organize your resume, sort of describe your major academic experiences like studying abroad, any papers you've written, any conferences you've attended, or just extracurricular activities like being part of a club. And I know, this sounds like a lot, but sort of doing this informally, having it out on paper, makes you realize, A, that you've done more than you thought you did, and B, these are sorts of really specific examples that will be really helpful in your personal statement. It'll be helpful in any potential interview, and it'll make your application stronger. So organizing all that material on paper is very helpful. Next, I think it's worth sort of discussing the differences between US master's programs and ones in the UK. So generally, most master's programs in the UK are 2 years, versus in the UK, most of them are only 1 year. US master's programs have much more extensive coursework. There's a lot of classes to be taken, more papers. In the UK program, sometimes there's actually no coursework. If you're doing what is called a research MPhil, your only responsibility is to write a thesis. You might have 1 or 2 maximum general courses. Now, there are more and more taught MA programs in the UK. When it's called a taught program, that means you're taking coursework. And that's basically a more American model. And in fact, the UK is moving in that direction. It is becoming more Americanized. But the classic MPhil program that you'll see at, say, Oxford, Cambridge, is largely a research one, actually, with very little coursework. And that can be a benefit to someone if you know a topic and you only want to spend it 1 year, but it could be a major drawback to someone who wants to take classes to improve their writing skills, critical thinking, communication, maybe even improve their English a bit, and also interact more with faculty and other students. Also, I think it's very important to remember that generally speaking, funding opportunities are more abundant in the US. There are more scholarships, there are more schemes to apply, and some of those are open to international students. In the UK, with the exception of a few scholarships like the Gates Cambridge for Cambridge, the Clarendon Fund for Oxford, there are far fewer opportunities. So, picking the right school, and I know this is something that you guys are probably particularly interested in hearing. The first thing that I want to say is that rankings are, of course, very important, but they're not everything. You know, going to a school that is ranked 15th as opposed to going to a school that's ranked 12th might be a much better, decision if the school specializes in what you're interested in. You know, if you want to do cyber policy within international relations, go to a school that has courses in this and faculty that do that, as opposed to a school that's slightly higher ranked. Obviously, there is a difference between going to a top 10 program and a top 50 school, but schools that are only a one-off from each other or that are all in the top 5, top 10 are quite similar in the quality of education. What is really important is to carefully read the department websites for international relations that will generally be political science, to check the curriculum, to check what are the graduation requirements. Do you have to write a thesis? Do you have to intern? Is there a more informal capstone project, which is basically like a shorter paper and a presentation? Obviously, is it a 2-year or a 1-year program? These things are really important. Diet can help you with this because we have mentors from all kinds of schools that know these programs firsthand. But it is very important to see how many faculty you have, how large the classes are, what kind of priority do graduate students get. Some universities, like the University of Chicago, prioritize their graduate students. Other universities, like Harvard, for instance, their political science is the exact opposite, where undergraduate and PhD students get priority over master's students. Also, if possible, I do recommend everyone to visit the university and go on an official campus tour. You will spend 1 or 2 years at this place. Convenience, location, these things I think are not as important as the academic quality of the university. But it's still worth going to see, do you like the university? You can also get a tour of the department. That kind of experience is, invaluable compared to just reading things on the website. And then if possible, talk to current students. This is important. You'll get great, sort of first-hand impressions. And if you are applying for a PhD, it is very important to contact professors because on the application itself, you have to designate a potential advisor. And the way to do that, again, Diet can help you, is, you send a very brief email that says, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm interested in the following topic for my PhD, or, you can list 2 or 3 topics. Is this something that interests you? Are you taking students next year? Very short, very informal, and professors are used to getting those sorts of emails. So, taking it to the next level, sort of talking a little about top IR programs. Obviously, there will be some debate about rankings and whatnot. I think what's most important is that there's this broad divide between what I would call academic programs and practitioner programs. Academic programs prepare you largely to then do a PhD and become an academic, a professor in political science, international relations. Now, these days, this divide isn't as sharp and kind of defined as it used to be, but in the past, that was very much the case. So a practitioner program would train you to become a journalist, work in business, NGOs, or even government, versus academic is sort of solely to prepare to be in a university. Now, I went to what is called very much an academic program, University of Chicago. Most of my fellow students, and myself included, end up not going to PhD programs after graduating. And I think at this point, all universities try to be as practical as possible, while a lot of practitioner programs now offer PhD programs as well. So that divide isn't as strong as it used to be, but still important to know. And so for practitioner schools, I would say without a doubt that the top programs are Johns Hopkins, SAIS, Georgetown, and Columbia SIPA, with Tufts and Harvard Kennedy also very, very good universities. Johns Hopkins particularly prides itself on being a practitioner program. There's no thesis requirement. There's a lot more networking. That sort of also is due to the fact that it's in Washington, D.C. And your personal statement needs to reflect that in terms of what you want to do after you graduate, your interests. It's a much more practical university. In terms of academic programs, like I mentioned earlier, the University of Chicago CIR program is probably one of the top. Oxford, University of California, San Diego, University of California, Berkeley, and Duke all have very fine academic programs. The goal of these master's programs is to give you the training to succeed in a PhD program. But like I said, along the way, you learn a lot of both qualitative and quantitative skills that are valuable for employers. But it might be the case that these universities don't quite have as many networking events and as much of a focus and push to get you to find a job in the non-academic sector after graduating. So, how do you write a strong statement? I would say the first thing to address in this is what is your academic background and why did you pick international relations? Again, it's a broad question, but even if you studied something not at all related to international politics, like maybe you studied art or literature, you can emphasize that you have really strong writing skills, you have analysis skills, but you now want to take those skills and put it into a setting involving international business, international politics, because again, international relations is a very broad field. But making that connection is important from your academic background to now this IR degree. Also, an MA statement should cover any relevant professional experience and future plans. Like we discussed, if you're applying for a practitioner program, they really want to see sort of, do you have any work experience beforehand? Some universities like Georgetown really value prior work experience. You also need to briefly discuss your future plans. Do you want to, again, work in the nonprofit sector? Do you want to work in a think tank, business? What are your interests? This is worth, spend at least a paragraph sort of on your professional experience and your future plans. Then, especially for the more academic programs, you do need to provide a research topic. It's not as detailed as the PhD proposal, where you have to, go in depth and in length into your potential dissertation topic and sort of demonstrate that you have the capacity to think through a realistic yet quite extensive research proposal that's suitable for a 5-year PhD program. For a master's thesis, that's obviously much more modest because you're writing something like like a 40 to 50, 60-page paper. But a tentative topic is good to have, and what I mean by that is you're not expected to have something specific like I want to study civil wars in the Congo region and what are the factors that prolong them. But something general, like, I'm interested in Africa, or I'm interested in overseas investment, or I'm interested in, China's policy towards the Middle East, something like that. So you have like a research topic, shows you've thought about it, maybe mention a book or two you've read or a paper, and, a few sentences, but very important. Lastly, this is something that a lot of international students sort of forget to do or don't address at all in any meaningful way, is sort of discuss how you want to be an active student on campus. And what I mean by that is, that you're not just going to be one more student sitting in a classroom, not joining clubs, not participating in the student life. And so if you could mention a club or two that you would like to join, some previous academic or non-academic hobbies, extracurricular activities that you want to continue, things that you can offer. A lot of international students sort of forget that because they studied abroad or because they studied elsewhere, they bring a very different perspective to the table. And in terms of class discussions, papers, you're going to enrich and give a different perspective to the students around you. And you shouldn't be shy about speaking out. And then B, universities want to hear about that because they want to create, an active environment where students learn not only just from professors, but also from each other as well. Like, this isn't a cliche. Like, admissions wants an academic, class and incoming class of students that is engaged, that is friends with each other, and is has those sort of meaningful connections where ideas are exchanged. So, what are some of the common mistakes? The first one I think I've seen. I've been at Diet now, working with Diet for about for 5 years, and I've seen a lot of students. In particular, I see this in a lot of students coming from China, where when they write their personal statement, they make them very general. There's not a lot of concrete information about either themselves or the university, which if you don't have specifics about the university, it suggests that you just wrote one personal statement for all 10 or 12 schools. You didn't really do the research. You actually don't know what the school or program that you're applying to. The other thing that I see is, sometimes overly sort of formal, language that is really, like Latin expressions, sort of unusual metaphors. And I get where that's coming from. You want to be formal. You want to impress the readers. But in reality, personal statements are not. They're written sort of in an accessible English, and also because admissions committees read hundreds of them, they want something that's sort of very clear, to the point, that can read it quickly and get a good grasp of the student. And if there's nothing specific in the personal statement, they quite frankly just don't know you. So this last bullet point, that there's nothing personal in a personal statement, this is really important. I really want to emphasize this. Like, 这个我要特别强调，就是你的个人的陈述中间应该有一些个人的东西。And this is like very, very important. You have to talk a little bit about your background. And I know for international students, sometimes this is a little bit awkward, a little bit, you're a bit shy to do this, but this is important. Lastly, sometimes you will see students have these very vague or unrealistic goals. And that's also a problem. You can't say that you want to, lead like a Fortune 500 company right after you graduate, or you start your own business but don't have any sort of specifics about what kind of startup it would be. And then also, if you don't discuss at all how you're going to give back to the school or the community. And again, it doesn't have to be very elaborate, but just little things like joining clubs, being active on campus. Admissions committees really value that, and it doesn't take very much time to add that into the personal statement, but it does make, it makes a difference. Lastly, in terms of the personal statement, I really want to emphasize, like I said, that you really have to be specific. The more specific you are, the better. And I wanted to just give you guys 2 examples. This is a student that I worked with last year, and he ended up getting into Columbia for a master's. The first part is sort of his original text that he wrote. He also applied to the University of Chicago's MAPS program. And he basically said, I was thrilled to find out about this program. I think very highly of this top-ranked program, and the faculty would allow me to reap great benefits, and at Chicago, it can add to my legal background and attain new knowledge. Now, on one hand, it could be a very sincere statement that he's very excited about Chicago, that he has a legal background, but we haven't found out anything about him. And you could just take out the University of Chicago and put in Columbia, the school he ended up going to, and it would read exactly the same. There's nothing specific about Chicago here either. Now, look at the final version of this. After we've sort of gone through edits and did the mentor calls, he still starts, sort of using his own voice with the fact that he was thrilled about finding out this program. But look at the green font. He says, I think highly of this program for its interdisciplinary structure and diversified flexibility, allowing me to take classes from various departments and schools such as the law school. The regular doctoral seminars are particularly relevant to my interests. All of a sudden, you see a lot of details about the University of Chicago. It shows that he has done his research. He knows what is different about the University of Chicago compared to other programs, and he makes it relevant to himself. He has shown that he has a legal background by being more detailed and, not saying I have a legal background. He demonstrated that he has a legal background. And this is a much stronger paragraph, and this is sort of, this is the look of a polished final draft of an excellent personal statement where the student was very successful and got into all the programs that he ended up applying to. So, if you decided to study international relations, what's going to happen afterwards? The first thing is a master's in international relations can be used to work in all kinds of fields. You can work in the private sector, management consulting, banking, which is what I did after I got my master's. You can work in publishing. If this is depending on your nationality. Obviously, I know in China the process of entering government is a little bit different, but in a lot of countries you can sort of join government and work in a policy capacity, sort of work for a government think tank, research institution. Obviously, China these days has those sorts of think tanks as well. You could work at a research institution outside of academia. Again, mostly think tanks, but these days there are more and more of those. Lastly, you can become a professor, but for this you would need to continue to do a PhD. And in fact, if you want to do a PhD, you don't necessarily have to enter academia, but it has to be something that is at least somewhat appealing to you, because most people that do a PhD are expected to teach afterwards. And then finally, you could go to law school. Now, law school in the U.S. is its own sort of process. It's 3 years. But I had a lot of students, and actually 2 international students from China in my University of Chicago master's class, who used this master's experience to sort of get the credentials and background to get into elite top law schools. So one of them, she ended up going to Harvard, and the other one continued at the University of Chicago and went to the University of Chicago Law School. And that sort of path is quite common because, in addition to taking the LSAT and having, other qualifications, law schools do look at your writing, your background, and spending a year or 2 in the United States is a great way to make you a stronger candidate for the very best law schools, even if you didn't have any sort of previous law background. The other thing that I want to talk to you guys today is the Gates Cambridge Scholarship, which is a scholarship that I'm currently on at the University of Cambridge doing a PhD in history. The Gates Scholarship, what's great about it is it's open to anyone in the world. It takes students from all over the world. There are students from Asia, Africa, Latin America, North America, Europe, you name it. And the trust has a very specific sort of requirement. They want students who have a clear record of academic excellence, leadership, and this is important, a commitment to the improvement of the lives of others. And what that means is that whatever you do, if it's in humanities or social sciences or hard sciences, what you're doing isn't just sort of for personal gain, for material gain, enrichment. You're going to give back to this world. And obviously, sometimes someone who studies international relations or art might say, how do I do that? If I'm an engineer, I could design some kind of new device that helps us reduce pollution, or a medical improvement that helps cures and a previous to incurable disease. But in reality, humanities are important. Humanities increase our understanding of this increasingly complicated world. It also helps us bridge conflicts. You can be more creative, but having that is important. Basically, saying that I just want to get a degree so then I can go and work in investment banking and make a lot of money is sort of really the opposite of the Gates Cambridge scholarship sort of ethos and philosophy. On the practical side, the first thing that you need to do is you need to apply to the University of Cambridge directly, and you need to get shortlisted by your faculty. So a strong personal statement is essential. What that means is, you're applying through the Cambridge University website for their deadlines, which are usually around October, some earlier, some later. And you just click in that general application that you also want to be considered for the Gates scholarship. Then you have to add one more letter of recommendation and an extra 500-word Gates personal statement, which is different from your personal statement for the program. And as you do that, you basically wait first for the department to shortlist you. So that first original personal statement, in this case of political science for international relations, needs to be really, really strong, like the one that I showed you previously, because the faculty have to like you. And if the faculty like you, they pass that short list to the Gates Committee, and then the Gates Committee will look at that extra letter of recommendation, your personal statement, to shortlist people for an interview. And how do you have that sort of really strong personal statement? Have a clear goal of why you're pursuing your MPhil, PhD, or any other degree. Talk a little bit more specifically about what do you want to do afterwards. In my case, I'm doing a PhD in modern Chinese history. I I stress the importance of Sino-U.S. relations. You guys know this better than I do. This is a vital relationship sort of for just the entire world. And so, I mentioned, while staying humble and sort of talking about that, my research is a very small part of this. This sort of bigger issue, this bigger topic is incredibly important. And I think it's, absolutely crucial to this third part about having a commitment to the improvement of the lives of others. And so that was my case. And by the time I was on the interview stage, the Gates Trust was also, very understanding of that. So I encourage all of you, you guys, none of you here are engineers or scientists. Just because you're not doing something like that doesn't mean you can't have a positive impact on society. In fact, I strongly encourage you guys to think in that way. So I know I covered a lot in this short presentation. You'll have the slides for your benefit. If you have any additional questions, go through Diet. I'm more than happy to answer anything specific. I've been doing this for a few years. As always, at first it's a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of information. But as you talk more, you have the calls, you write a few rough drafts of your personal statement, you think about it, you get feedback, you get a lot of corrections, edits. Over time, the process actually becomes pretty straightforward, and you come out with a much stronger application and also a much clearer understanding of the university and what you want to do. And that's just a great way to start your master's program or your PhD with a lot more confidence and a lot of more background knowledge. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to your questions. Bye.